Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. I'm your host, Grayson Garvin. Today's episode is my interview with Brian Adams, a friend in Nashville who is the founder of Excelsior Capital, a private real estate firm providing investment opportunities on a syndicated deal-by-deal basis. Please listen to Brian's thoughtfulness and the way he is trying to approach his life on a daily basis. So without further ado, let's get to it. Brian C. Adams, welcome to the Pursuit Podcast this afternoon. We're thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. It's awesome.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, as I was preparing for this, I was thinking back to, some of our previous interactions. And in some ways, I probably never told you this, but as I was, kind of getting out of athletics into the business world, you were in some ways a person that a lot of people regarded as, a master networker, a master businessman. And so we've spent some time together and then subsequently talking about content and podcasting and, all these other things. And, we also both sit in the greater kind of finance landscape as well. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. So thanks again so much for coming on.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. It's been a journey, and good for you for getting the show running. I know it's a lot more work than people think. People just assume, oh, I've got a podcast or a show, but as you've discovered or are learning, a lot more to it than just thinking you're Tim Ferriss. So good for you.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, where I'd love to start, and we were talking a little bit about this offline, and, we'll get into your story here in just a few minutes. Because I'd love to, again, get a high level overview of that. But, at face value, Brian Adams has it all together, right? You run a real estate company, you have a podcast. I look today has 249 episodes. You have, content that goes out to, thousands of people on a weekly and monthly basis. There's a lot of positivity or a lot of quote success, sitting behind a lot of that data. But I think you and I both know that having success, whatever success means to anyone, is never a linear progression. So I'd love to hear from your standpoint, how does Brian Adams define success in his own life?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that I struggle with often. I think for a long time, I was like, um, I was definitely focused on a lot of metrics in terms of I associated success or my personal worth, value, or self-esteem with having a certain amount of followers on LinkedIn, a certain amount of people on my distribution list, a certain amount of AUM, dollars in the bank account, whatever the metric is in your business, like whatever the widget is, I would assign a lot of value to that, and I would project my own self-worth and success onto it. And what I found were those are really, really dangerous ways to gauge your success, because inevitably when you hit them, nothing really fundamentally has changed, and you end up going into a pretty dark place, or at least that's what happened to me, because you wake up the next day and you realize, wow, I may have done this thing that I kind of thought was this big accomplishment, but I'm still me. And so it's really become more of a journey about just feeling comfortable with who I am. And I think for a lot of us, we wake up in the morning and we put on a costume, we wear a mask oftentimes. And if you do that enough every day, day in, day out, you lose sight of who you actually are or who you were, like what used to bring you joy, what you used to really have fun doing. And you become that person that you were pretending to be. And that's a super scary place to be. And so I've almost been devolving back on some level to try to figure out what it is that I enjoy doing, who it is that I think I am, or at least I used to be. And so success for me is trying to just figure out what the best version of myself is. And oftentimes that's thinking about being the best husband I can be, being the best dad I can be, being the best physical and mental wellness version of myself. And so that's kind of how I think about it. That's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's really good. And I think it's good for listeners to hear, because the answers that you just gave are essentially the antithesis of the metric. When you talk about being a good husband, being a good father, being, health and wellness and the things that, yeah, in some way, shape, or form, there are ways to measure some of those things, but it's the antithesis of the bank account, the AUM, the followers, the things that, you know, don't really necessarily breathe life into us at the end of the day.
Yeah, that I think that's exactly right. And the really tough thing about being an entrepreneur, being in financial or professional services is typically the things that allow you or that are a precedent conditional for you to achieving what many of us would view as success are those things that are exactly opposite to you being like a good person, a good human, a good dad, a good husband, a good friend. Because what it takes oftentimes to be a successful entrepreneur or white collar attorney or investment banker or super high end wealth manager are like sacrificing a lot of your time, sacrificing a lot of your wellness, right? I mean, those are things that we think of when we think about people who have accomplished these incredible things. Like they work all the time. They don't really spend any time on their health or wellness. They don't really have friends. They just have business colleagues. And they are very often like divorced or have a bad relationship with their spouse. And they typically have a bad relationship with their kids. And so all these things that we associate with having to create that success in a business form are the exact 180 of what it takes to be a success as a human.
Yeah, that's right. 100%. So how, again, being a decade plus into, again, this company that, again, you're running, I know that it's taken a couple of iterations, which I want to talk about here in a few minutes. Um, how do you feel like you kind of combat that? Because to your point, it's kind of, it feels like the current of being fulfilled, the current of being a successful person per se, at times is running, contradictory to the success specifically in the greater finance or entrepreneurial landscape. So how do you feel like you kind of combat that on a daily or moment by moment basis?
I feel like I'm failing this week. I was on the road 3 days. I got home at 12:35 this morning. So, you know, pulled a 20-hour day yesterday. Woke up in time to see my kids. Um, that's probably 2 or 3 hours I saw them this week. And yeah, I would say that I've tried to give myself a little bit of grace. Oftentimes we're our own harshest critic. And there's no great answer. I think it is the right question. The way that I've been able to manage it myself is to think about seasons of life and also just chapters of your journey. And so right now my kids are 10 and 7, I'm 41. This is a busy season of life. Like I've got work stuff, I'm trying to keep my marriage rolling. I'm trying to not be like falling into a middle-aged health trap, right? And then I'm trying to be a super active dad. And so I think just taking a step back and realizing this is going to be full on for 10 years. And then when my boys are, in middle or late high school, they're not going to want to spend that much time with me. They're going to have cars. And then obviously when they're in school and college, like they're gone, right? And so right now it's just about kind of moving some pieces around the chessboard to prioritize things that need prioritization now, and then keeping these other things at least going, and then you can revisit them. But you can't be all these things all the time. And I think the realization of that can be super helpful. So I try to have like bumpers. I really try not to work on the weekend. I really try to have dinner with my family every night that I'm home and not traveling. I try not to work past 6 o'clock when I'm in Nashville. And so I don't always hit it, but those are some guidelines because I can definitely fall into a trap of I mean, you know how it is. You can just work all there's the work will be there. Like the work will take as
It
much as
doesn't
you
go away.
the work will take as
Yeah.
much as you give it, as much as you allow it to take, it will take it from you. And, you know, you've gotta have you've gotta have some boundaries. And that's where I've found some peer groups to be really helpful and reconnecting with some friends who can give you a reality check to be super helpful on that too. Um, but that comes with age and scar tissue and seeing a lot of my friends get divorced or have substance abuse issues or have workaholic issues. And so it can be very hard to have perspective on that when you're in the trenches every day.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad that you said too, peer groups and people around you. One of the things that I believe, and I think this probably comes from my athletic background, but I believe that we're better together. That as humans, it is easy. You mentioned a mask or a facade. I think it's easy, especially as men, to try to come across as that we have it all together. But I think as just humans, it's like we're we might be able to do a lot on ourselves with or by ourselves, and we can go a lot further together. And I think a lot of times it takes a community around you to hold you up sometimes when you can't hold yourself up, and vice versa. I think it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, I, I I was a college athlete and definitely found myself in a situation where you think of those people as your friends, as your really close friends, and then somebody dies or there's an event where you get back together and you realize, man, I haven't talked to these guys in 5 or 10 years sometimes. And I can tell you that it's really hard to carve out the time in your 20s and 30s and 40s to spend with those guys. But you don't want to be the next time you see them to be at a wake or a funeral. Like that's
Yeah,
just not what you want. And so what we started doing is I just have the same weekend twice a year where we spend time together and I block it out of my calendar. I get buy-in from my wife. And as men, like we find this need to have this like proxy to hang out together, like golf or travel or like whatever, which is fine. But there's it's the first weekend in August and then the second weekend in October. And I just it's usually 3 nights. And that's just on my calendar. And it just I have it's never a convenient time. Like it's never a great time. But if you never take the time and you don't have other people hold you accountable, you're gonna be like my dad, who's a 71-year-old guy with no friends and no hobbies just because he worked forever. And at
yeah,
some point, like, your stuff goes in a cardboard box and you stop working, and then what are you gonna do?
yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I was told somebody earlier today along this same line of thinking is that it you said it, it's never convenient. It almost feels selfish at times because again, there's so many other things around you that also are garnering for your time. But ultimately what happens is you become a better version of yourself when you get plugged back into those relationships and business and other things that require you at that point. So it's actually, it's kind of an exponential help.
Yeah, and I think for and I'll speak to my lived experience as a man. I think for men especially, and this is not to say that women don't have these challenges, but again, I can speak to my own world. I think for men, we have this baseline mode where, oh, like, I can be an island, I can be by myself. I'm a strong, powerful individual on my own, and I don't need resources or help. Like I can do this. But what you realize is when you do include others on that journey, you do become a better version of yourself. And the people that know you the best are the ones that spent all that time with you back then, whatever back then was for you.
Yeah.
And you kind of find yourself a little bit when you spend time with them. And what's really cool is if you're consistent, like you're going on this journey with them. Like now, my buddies that I hang out with, we're all entering into this 40s age, and we're all going through these challenges together, and these conversations are about, like, you know, TRT and having kids and, getting old together, and it makes the journey a lot more pleasurable.
Yeah. I'm glad you said journey because that's really what we're trying to highlight today. And that kind of segues into, again, a little bit more macro side of your journey. I think again, I mentioned this at the onset. You run a real estate company. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that. Again, you have almost 250 podcast episodes. It's easy to, again, look at somebody like you and see where you are now and think that it just happened like that. Clearly, that doesn't happen like that. So give us kind of a 30,000-foot overview of kind of how Brian Adams got to where he is today,
Yeah, and just to reiterate, like, I'm a work in progress.
as
And
we all are.
and what you realize when you actually sit down and talk to some of these people who you only know through Instagram or LinkedIn or from afar is, and it's kind of reassuring. It's like everyone's a mess. Like, everyone's
Right.
figuring it out on the fly. No one has arrived. And if you have the right perspective, I think that can be super healthy for you. But yeah, so I'll kind of give you the snapshot from New York. Met my wife in college. We both went to a small liberal arts school in Connecticut. I played lacrosse there, so that was my college kind of experience as an athlete. And then we did the Northeast thing for a bit. My wife's from Nashville, so we moved back here 15 years ago. And I'll give you kind of like the unvarnished version of the pitch. It's a little bit different than maybe what I give to my investors, but my wife's family is very affluent, so they have a family office here, and I didn't know what that was when I married her, and I joined this board of this family partnership and learn about this whole world of private equity and alternative investing and family offices. And I mean, I didn't have any idea what that was. I grew up very comfortably, but my family, we were not finance people, and I never worked on Wall Street or anything, so it just was a different space for me. And I started hanging out at the Entrepreneur Center and got involved with an organization called the Phoenix Club, which is a young men's professional development organization in town, and became enamored with this whole idea of being an entrepreneur, even though I didn't know what that was, but just thought it was a great idea. And through a series of events, started a real estate company here. And, it was really because I was an attorney at the time, and I I was at the DA's office here in Nashville, and I really wanted to work at like a corporate law firm because I thought that would be the solution to all my problems, right? Make more money and have this status and blah blah blah. I couldn't get a job. Like, I could not. Nobody cared that I was a prosecutor, and I didn't go to a great law school, and I didn't have skills that were marketable to those places. And so I left the DA's office and joined this small little tiny firm. It was four of us, and was doing whatever would come across my desk, and I was shucking and jiving. And then I connected with another New Yorker who married a Nashville native as well. We started our real estate company, but it was a side hustle. And I mean, there was a time I remember where my firstborn had just come. He was like 3 months old, and my law practice was nothing. And I just thought, I was watching the Masters. Remember, it was like Masters Sunday. I was at my in-laws, and I just decided, like, I'm gonna try to do this. Like, why not? And we can go into the real estate side, but that's kind of the origination story. Was I just had, and thankfully had the support of my wife's family and that cushion to go out and try something and be comfortable with failing. But I mean, it was a lot different then than it was now, I could promise you, in terms of how it started and what it looked like from the inside and the outside, promise you.
For sure, absolutely. And even within the real estate company itself, it's taken a couple of different iterations. Walk us through a little bit, how it sits now, because I've heard I don't even know that I've heard you tell me this directly, but I've actually heard you explain this on other podcasts where in some, again, you guys are doing some innovative things that a lot of folks are not doing on the real estate, investment side. So walk through kind of what Excelsior Capital looks like today and what the offering is.
Yeah, so, I had a legacy firm that's still around, it's called Priam Capital, and it was a mess in terms of, like, capital structure. We would do funds, deal by deal, direct co-investment alongside the funds. We did JV deals with private equity groups, 90-10 splits, and that kinda thing, and it was this mishmash, and I made all the classic entrepreneurial mistakes, like I ran too fast, didn't have proper back office, didn't spend enough on infrastructure or tech, didn't know that I had to worry about HR and all these other things. And so I made all these mistakes, which we don't have enough time to get into, but Excelsior was kind of 2.0 iteration to not repeat those mistakes. And the way we thought about it was bringing institutional style asset management to a high net worth accredited investor, taxable investor base, and then really leveraging a lot of what we learned about content marketing and crowdfunding like style in terms of investor relations and reporting and user and focusing on the investor journey from the moment you touch with our ecosystem all the way through to when you become an investor, like mapping out every single stage. And so now it's really almost like a multimedia marketing company with a real estate product associated with it. And we have a distribution list of about 5,000 accredited investors, about 10,000 people get our newsletter, and we could go really down the rabbit hole on anything you want to in terms of how we think about that. But that was a big fundamental shift for us, was understanding that individuals and families want to invest with other individuals and families and taking that part of it super seriously, in addition to being, a really rock solid real estate company on the investor side. It was thinking through, okay, like what would this look like if we took it really seriously every step of the way using automation, technology, and best in class marketing strategies.
For sure. And you guys are doing it different because you're doing, again, deal by deal
Just deal by
syndication
deal syndication. Yeah.
solely.
Yeah.
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 And that's unique too, because I think, and I've heard you mention this before, it's that in the industry, the sexy thing to do is to go raise a big fund, right?
Hmm.
But that's difficult. It can take a long, long time. And you're also missing a subset of the market, which you guys are really tapping into. You're providing access to these things that historically people of this, demographic who are still very wealthy haven't been able to tap into.
Yeah. It was a couple of different things. One, I think a lot of people in our industry want to go raise a fund because it's kind of um, the sexy thing to do, and they want to talk about their AUM. What I did was I went on a listening tour after the first iteration, and instead of just really slamming down their throats what I thought was right or what I wanted to do, actually listen to what these people wanted. And again, this is my investor base, so it's not going to be true for everybody. These are folks that would meet with me and talk with me and spend time with me. And the reality was they just wanted deal by deal opportunities. And at the time, this is, pre interest rate craziness, but they wanted yield and they wanted good solid product. And so instead of jamming my ideas, like my what I call the ego pitch, like I'm really smart, I can do all these things, and you're going to do it because I'm going to force you to. I actually just gave them a solution set to their problems, and it became more of an empathetic pitch. And that's when the business really took off, is when I started listening and just delivering what I thought was a solution to their problems. And that was kind of part of it. The other part for entrepreneurs listening, we took a look around our ecosystem of other sponsors and GPs and fund managers and operators and kind of talked about, okay, like who does nobody really want to work with? And even though they say it, nobody really wants to work with high net worth individuals because it's a long sales cycle. It's a hard conversion. They don't write big checks, but they're pretty high maintenance, right? They expect a lot. They want white glove service. And then we thought, okay, well, what's the most challenging amount of capital to raise in our space? And again, this is a little bit dated, but at the time it was, call it 3 to 5 million of equity. Very challenging amount of equity to raise. People who are ultra high net worth or big family offices or private equity groups want to write $25 million check, $10 million equity check. Meanwhile, your country club investors want to write a $50,000 check. And so that's considered a very challenging space to raise in. And so we decided, okay, well, like we're just going to go where nobody else wants to go. And we're going to do what nobody else wants to do. And, we had a great ride with it for 5 years. It's really fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I think it's important to, mention too that you said, and not to gloss over that this is kind of iteration 2.0,
Mm.
that I think, again, it's easy to see where a company is now and not necessarily what, again, what has been required to get there. And, when you talk about stumbling or when you talk about failure, when you talk about any of those types of words, I believe that the only true failure is just not getting back up off the mat. That's it. And oftentimes, again, and going on the listening tour, I think is so cool because I'm sure that you garnered so much wisdom from what those people told you. I'd be interested too, and this is just a quick aside question. How much different was what you thought going into that listening tour and what you actually got out of it?
Well, I got my teeth kicked in pretty good by a lot of folks too, because I'd underdelivered on investor relations, reporting, communication, transparency. And if you people are nice, but if you give them the opportunity to provide feedback, they're going to give it to you. And so it was a humbling experience for sure. Because in our business, you think, oh, I'm a deal guy and I have all the square footage and this AUM and I'm getting acquisitions done. But if your investors think that your reporting sucks, you only talk to them once a year and they've got to call somebody to get the answers to their questions, or they don't know where their K1 is, or your K1's late, or both,
Yeah.
nobody gives a shit about how great your deals are. Like
Yeah.
it's a customer experience. It's a
Yep.
client-centered business. It's like private wealth management. And if your tech stack's not up for it, or you didn't spend enough money to have a controller in-house, or you have a bad investor relations portal, like nobody really cares about your IRR. And I think the opposite is true is if you just get those things right and you just hit doubles all day, you can build a fantastic business. And I think that's the big realization is, I mean, there's a million of me on LinkedIn, like helping busy professionals to have passive cash flow, tax efficient returns, like blah, blah, blah. You could find a million guys like that out there. But I don't know. I don't know if any of them have thought through the investor journey really seriously. And we take it super seriously. I mean, you're in our
Yeah.
CRM. I think you get our stuff.
Yep.
Like, we're constantly looking at our metrics, our KPIs, top of the funnel, mid funnel, end of the funnel conversions, open rates, click through rates, A B testing, trying to figure out the best way to provide value to our community, be that through my podcast or Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn or whatever. And you've got to really love that process and that part of the business because I think there's two sides to it, right? There's like the real estate, there's the widgets, the selling stuff. Those have to work. But then there's everything else that goes into it that surrounds that and that makes it possible to be successful. Um, and that was a big realization for me.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think what that intentionality does, I think, you mentioned again, it's essentially, we both live in these commoditized industries, right? And what the intentionality with the investor relations stuff does is it provides a level of rapport. And so you're able to bypass maybe an initial level of trust that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And ultimately, what people in our business do or what clients do is they do business with those that they like and trust because to your point, it's like you can go out and get yield 35 different places, right? But if they like and trust you, then that goes a long way to, you know, getting clients to convert.
Yeah. No, you nailed it. I actually think the returns aren't meaningless, but they're pretty low. If you talk to investors about what their priorities are, I mean, you have to perform, but the difference between 100 basis points versus a really smooth investor user experience, I think they'd take the user experience. I really
I
do.
don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong there at all. Um, so obviously, you know, again, you've done a lot of work. You're very, you know, you're a very thoughtful person. You said that you're 41. Um, I love asking this question. What do you know now that you wish newly graduated from college Brian Adams knew that would have saved you a lot of headache and heartache between then and now?
Phew. A lot of things. Um, I wish I knew that what people refer to as maladaptive behavior. So for me, that was drinking, alcohol, and working a lot were not going to solve the issues I have around self-esteem and self-worth and shame. Those are not long-term solutions to those problems. No matter how hard I work or what I do, it's not going to give me the affirmation from my dad that I want. So I should stop pursuing that for that purpose. I mean, I think you can do it for other reasons, but the minute you empower somebody else in your life to either to dictate how you feel about yourself is a really dangerous thing to do because you have no control over what that person does or how they behave. The other thing I would spend more time on is being empathetic and realizing that other people are really struggling, like, all the time, especially ones that you think objectively are successful.
Mm,
They are hurting badly. Those would be, like, the first off the bat of where I would start because I spent a
yeah,
lot of time going down those rabbit holes.
for sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. You know, and that too requires, you know, that requires a lot of work, a lot of hard work to kind of dig down into those places and in some ways probably deconstruct, you know, a psyche that might have been built up for quite a long time. And I think that's really important to mention too, because I think a lot of people can think about, you know, mental health or counseling or therapy or whatever it might be. And I've done my fair share myself. Like that is hard work that is being done because again, oftentimes and going back to the or, you know, again, the concept of being better together, we so often in our own minds tell ourselves the lies. It's very easy to tell myself the lie. And oftentimes it's not easy to tell myself the truth. I need others around me to be like, no, Grayson, you know, you're good, not bad. You're this, you're not that. And I think that without that kind of work, it it does become a negative sum game. And so thank you for sharing that. But I think it was just important for me to say that that's hard work being done there to kind of be able to being able to share that.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of us, what is culturally in our society supported in terms of easy solutions, like going out and getting hammered or working all the time and never seeing your family or playing golf all the time. Like those are socially sanctioned activities and they're actually lauded and we think that they're admirable. Where when the reality is like the really hard work is can you spend 12 minutes in a room by yourself with no stimulus? Couldn't you spend 2 hours with your wife outside on a walk or at dinner with no phone and be vulnerable? Could you spend an hour with your kids without any distraction and listen and care about what's going on in their life? That, for me, is really hard, like
Yeah.
super hard. And I have to really check myself when I think, oh, I'm doing this for my family. Like I'm taking this red eye back from wherever and I'm going to go blah, blah, blah. Where lots of times it's avoidance behavior and you're just trying to block. That is a work in progress for me.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. So now, with where you are now, is, somebody listening here today resonates with your story and in one way, shape, or form wants to, experience, the level of success that you have or aspires to, content or real estate or whatever, you know, what are, what's one or two things that you think that that individual would need to hear in order to, again, be successful?
I would I would encourage them to surround themselves by third parties who are truth speakers. So that'd be, probably a therapist, a mentor, a business coach. I'm a member of YPO, which has been really helpful for me in my development because there are venues and formats you go into where people are very honest with you. And we do a thing called experience share. So we don't tell people what they should do, but we show them like what worked for us or what we've experienced in a similar situation or fact pattern. And you can fall into a trap of just sticking in your own head and living the world that you think you are. But if you don't have other people around you to again use a term like truth sayers, truth speakers, I don't know. I think it can be very hard, but it can accelerate your development.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, better. Again, we're better together. We as humans we need others around us to continue to propel us where we want to go. One more thing too that as we kind of initially wrap up here, and this is another thing that obviously, again, I believe that we are better together. Another kind of key tenet that has been true in my own life is I think that fear is the enemy. And I say that a lot. I talk about that in the podcast. And I think there's kind of two kinds of fear. There's fear that can be positive to propel you into action. And I think that there can be, positive side effects from that. But I also think that there's negative fear that, again, going back to some of the lies that we tell ourselves, I, in my own story, have fallen prey to that at times. And that's a little bit more of what I'm speaking to again, things that can take our eye off the ball and that may not be truth. Um, so if I may be so bold to ask, what's a fear that, again, that you struggle with in your probably more specifically in your business life? Because again, we're talking to a lot of, entrepreneurs here, but what's something that, again, takes Brian Adams' eye off the ball?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I alluded to earlier, this dynamic, I'm sure it was like I mean, you're a college athlete. I think for a lot of us, um, the male role models that we grew up with, were of a type to allow us to excel at that sport or that activity or that area of expertise that we thought was important at the time. So for me, I went to military school and then played college athletics. And so really surrounded myself with pretty strict, stern, like action oriented individuals who thought that progress came through sacrifice and pain solely. And that if it wasn't hard, it wasn't worth doing and you weren't accomplishing anything unless it like almost destroyed you, right?
Mm.
It doesn't have to be the case. And so you can surround yourself with different stories and understanding that like you are not your thoughts just because you're feeling angry or fearful or depressed or anxious. Those are emotions, but if you can train yourself to put that emotion on the table and realize that it's like traffic going by and you're on the sidewalk, and you can start becoming curious, like, I wonder why I'm so scared of this, like what I'm afraid of. I think for me, that's been a big one in terms of how I view the business. And, I think for a lot of us, especially as we go into our 40s, I know for me, a big fear is this my highest and best use? Like, am I missing out on an opportunity left on the table? And I'm so scared to try something new because I know it works, but am I limiting myself? And am I worried about what these people that I think really care about me or spend a lot of time thinking about me, and when in reality they don't? Because what I try to remind myself of is if I'm trying to make a hard decision, and I've got a couple on the table right now, like really challenging decisions. And if I find myself like, "Oh, but what do you think like Bill would think about this?" Dude, if you die, Bill would probably think about you for maybe a week, maybe. I mean, honestly, if he came to your funeral, he'd probably have a conference call afterwards or a coffee meeting. Like in 100 days, nobody cares. I'm not saying you should be a bad actor, but if you want something, like you should go for it. And I really get hung up on that kind of stuff. I'm like, ugh. But like I talk to these people and they think of me as this, or what do you think they would think about that idea? Or what if I fail and XYZ person judges me for that? Nobody cares. We should just do it.
Yeah. That's raw and real, and I love it. And I think it's counter to my personality because I'm not historically a risk taker, but I think when you step out into doing something, and you can speak to this, you've done it, there's kind of an unexplainable freedom that exists in doing that, even though you are in some ways kind of stepping out without clothes on, and it can be vulnerable, but it is, it's also pretty, it's also pretty amazing at the same time. So, that's, I there's a tension there without a doubt,
Work in
without a doubt.
progress.
That's right. As we all are, as we all are. Well, I like to end, and you're in finance. All the people that we talk to are not in finance. I like to end with a finance question. And my hunch is that you probably will know this right off the bat. But as a fun, lighthearted way to end our conversation today, do you remember the first thing that you saved for when you were a little guy?
Mm, wow. The first thing that I saved money for. Yeah. Um, I, so when I went to the small liberal arts school in Connecticut, and, I never had to work in through high school. I was very fortunate. My dad would make us work construction in the summers to, like, teach us about what, like, real work was, and that was awful. Brutal work and very effective. Like, I grew up out in the country, and so, like, I grew up next to a dairy farm, and then I worked heavy road construction in the summer. And
Goodness.
so it's funny to me that like all these beer ads and stuff are like, "Oh, this being a farmer is like I want to retire and be a farmer." And I'm like, "Dude, that is brutal work. Like you clearly never did any of this because it's awful." But
Yeah.
so I was fortunate I didn't really have to work much in high school, but in college, I loved to ski, and I had a buddy, a fraternity brother of mine, who his family owned a gourmet cheese shop in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is like Beverly Hills. I mean, super affluent, hoity-toity, like really super nice part of Boston. And I worked in the cheese shop before Christmas, and that was their busiest time of year, and it was bananas. Like you're on your feet 15 hours a day and running around and working with these like interfacing with these horrendously awful people, super rude, right? giving them caviar and stuff. And I would jam it out and I would make like, I think like 2 or $3,000 cash. I'd go leave Christmas Eve day, go home Christmas, and then I would go skiing and spend all my money every year for 3 years in a row. I'd blow it all on a ski trip in Whistler with my friends. And that was like the first thing that worked super hard for and spent all my money on, and it was great. Good experience.
I get it. Skiing and Whistler is a pretty
It
sweet deal.
was
So I get it 100%.
it was great, and working I think everyone should work retail because
Yeah.
it gives you a huge appreciation for how horrible people are.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Brian, thank you so much for this conversation today. Thank you for your vulnerability and being real and letting us know, again, it's just it's great. It's great to hear. I think it's important conversation because none of us have it all together, regardless of how, how much success it may or may not seem that we have. So I appreciate your openness to have this conversation today.
Thanks for what you're doing, man. It's important. I'm happy to help. Anyone can ping me, LinkedIn, shoot me a note. I will be real with you, talk with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Brian. And thank you guys for listening today. Remember, here at The Pursuit, we believe that fear is the enemy and hard work, focus, and perseverance is what it takes to win. I'm your host, Grayson Garvin. Until next time, this is The Pursuit.